What if I told you the world is running out of sand? Not white sand beaches or playground sand, but the kind that holds up skyscrapers, makes your phone work, and built Dubai from the desert up. This isn't just a story about scarcity. It's about how the world's most overlooked material became a black market goldmine, fueled corruption, triggered violence, and might just reshape the global economy. In the next 30 minutes, we'll follow the surreal journey of sand, from grains on a beach to billion-dollar shadow deals, and why the future of our cities might depend on it. Sand is everywhere, beneath our feet at the beach, in children's playgrounds, across deserts that stretch for miles. It's so common we barely notice it, let alone consider it valuable. But this is where the paradox begins. Despite its abundance, the kind of sand the modern world runs on is disappearing. We're surrounded by it, and yet we're running out. And most people don't even realize it's happening. This isn't just about beaches eroding or construction delays. This is a global story, one where the most ordinary material on Earth has quietly become one of the most demanded, extracted, and fought over resources in the world. And understanding why starts with a surprising truth. Not all sand is created equal. The word sand might conjure up endless desert dunes, but that's actually the wrong kind. Desert sand, shaped by wind over millennia, is too smooth and round to stick together in concrete. It flows like powdered sugar, not gravel. The sand that the world really needs for buildings, roads, and glass is sharp, angular, and gritty. It comes from riverbeds, lakes, and coastlines, where water grinds it into jagged fragments perfect for binding. This type of sand has become so essential to human development that it's now more valuable than many metals. And unlike desert sand, it's limited, locked in ecologies that are being disrupted to mine it. Sand is the hidden ingredient behind almost everything modern. Mixed with cement, it becomes concrete, the literal foundation of cities, highways, and infrastructure. Melt it down, and it becomes glass, for skyscraper windows, car windshields, and fiber optic cables. Refine it further, and you get silicon, the building block of microchips that power smartphones, satellites, and artificial intelligence. It's in solar panels, wind turbine blades, even toothpaste. From physical infrastructure to digital networks, sand isn't just a raw material. It's the skeleton of civilization. Strip away the sand, and our entire world would collapse. The scale is almost too massive to grasp. Every year, we use around 50 billion tons of sand, more than any other natural resource except water. To build a single home takes around 200 tons. A hospital, about 3,000 tons. 1 kilometer of highway, nearly 30,000 tons. It accounts for roughly 70% of all construction materials used globally. That means we consume more sand by volume than oil. Yet unlike oil, we barely track it. There's no global market, no centralized data, no international regulation. It flows through the world like air, extracted in staggering quantities, often without oversight or accountability. Nowhere is the absurdity more visible than Dubai, a glittering metropolis in the desert built on spectacle and, ironically, built on imported sand. Despite being surrounded by dunes, Dubai sources construction-grade sand from places like Australia because its own desert sand is too smooth to use. Entire artificial islands, luxury towers, and beachfront resorts are made possible only by sand dredged from distant shores. Dubai isn't alone. It's just the most surreal example of a global pattern. Cities are rising faster than nature can supply the sand to build them, and in the shadows of this booming demand, a dark economy is emerging. Between 2011 and 2013, China used more concrete than the United States did in the entire 20th century. That's over 6.6 gigatons in just 3 years, enough to build a wall 90 feet high and a foot thick around the entire planet. This breakneck urbanization transformed China from a rural country into a nation of megacities almost overnight. But that transformation came at a hidden cost, an astronomical demand for sand. Every skyscraper in Shanghai, every highway in Shenzhen, every high-speed rail line slicing through the countryside, all of them required billions of tons of construction-grade sand. China's rise isn't just a story of steel and ambition, it's a story of sand. And the consequences of devouring it so fast, no one stopped to ask what would happen next. To feed this insatiable appetite, miners turned to riverbeds, beaches, and lake bottoms, scraping them bare for the gritty, jagged sand cities are built on. The result? Some rivers in India have dropped so low they've stopped flowing. Indonesia has lost entire islands, literally erased from the map. In Kenya, river ecosystems have collapsed and farmland has been swallowed by erosion. These aren't just local issues. When sand is stripped from rivers, it destabilizes everything downstream, threatening biodiversity, drinking water supplies, and food production. What looks like harmless dredging is, in reality, ecological surgery without anesthesia. And with demand rising, the world's waterways are being carved up faster than they can recover. Despite the environmental toll, the global trade in sand has quietly exploded. It's now one of the largest materials traded by volume, just behind water and oil. Yet it's almost entirely unregulated. There's no UN oversight, no standard pricing, and almost no transparency. Countries export it without tracking where it goes or how it was sourced. And because good sand is finite and essential, a black market has emerged in its shadow. From Singapore importing sand from Cambodia, to Dubai buying it from Australia, to smugglers sneaking it across borders in night boats, sand has become a quiet currency of development. A trillion-dollar economy is literally being built on it. But beneath that economy, something darker is stirring. As sand becomes more scarce and valuable, it's no longer just a resource, it's a racket. In India, Southeast Asia, and parts of Africa, organized crime groups known as sand mafias have taken over extraction sites. They bribe local officials, threaten residents, and run illegal dredging operations around the clock. In many places, they outnumber and outmuscle law enforcement. These aren't just rogue operators, they're coordinated, violent, and deeply embedded in local power structures. Trucks haul away river sand by the ton under the cover of night, while inspectors look the other way. For these groups, sand isn't just profit, it's power, and in regions where governments are weak or complicit, that power is nearly absolute. The price of speaking out against illegal sand mining can be fatal. In 2015, Indian journalist Sandeep Kathari was abducted and burned alive after investigating mafia-run operations. Environmentalist Sumaira Abdullali, one of the first to raise alarm bells, survived multiple attacks and threats just for documenting illegal dredging. And they're not alone. From Mexico to Morocco, whistleblowers, activists, and even police officers have been harassed, injured, or killed for confronting the sand trade. These are not isolated incidents. They're part of a global pattern, where the most basic material on Earth has become dangerous to challenge. The sand trade doesn't just destroy landscapes, it erases lives. So how does all this sand end up in gleaming city skylines and global supply chains? Through a mix of willful ignorance and deliberate complicity. Developers eager to cut costs turn a blind eye to sourcing. Middlemen launder sand through fake permits and paperwork. And governments, desperate for growth, often ignore the damage as long as the concrete keeps pouring. Even major infrastructure projects backed by international banks have used sand from dubious or illegal sources. The system is rigged, not by design, but by neglect. In the rush to build faster and cheaper, no one's asking the hard question, where is all this sand really coming from? The answer, more often than not, is somewhere no one wants to look. For years, Indonesia quietly sold millions of tons of sand to fuel Singapore's rapid expansion. But the trade came with an invisible cost. Entire islands began to vanish. Literally, over 24 small Indonesian islands have disappeared from satellite maps, eroded into nothing as dredging stripped away their foundations. In some cases, what started as minor coastal mining turned into full-blown geological erasure. Fishermen lost their homes, borders shifted, and communities were displaced, all for the sake of feeding someone else's skyline. Indonesia eventually banned sand exports to Singapore, but the damage was already done. When the world treats sand as disposable, entire nations can lose land, one grain at a time. Singapore is one of the smallest countries on Earth, and one of the fastest growing. Since independence, it has increased its landmass by over 25% through aggressive land reclamation, pouring sand into the sea to create more territory. But that expansion wasn't self-sufficient. It made Singapore the world's largest importer of sand, sourcing it from Malaysia, Indonesia, Cambodia, and Myanmar. As the city-state built glittering towers, luxury malls, and artificial coastlines, its neighbors watched their own landscapes shrink. The irony is stark, a global financial hub built on vanishing geography. Singapore may be a model of modern success, but its foundation, quite literally, rests on the disintegration of someone else's environment. Sand might not sound like a strategic resource, but for many countries, it's becoming one. China, India, the UAE, all are racing to urbanize, to build, to expand. That requires colossal amounts of sand, often imported or extracted at unsustainable rates. Some nations are even stockpiling it, seeing future scarcity as a geopolitical risk. It's an unspoken arms race, not of weapons, but of raw materials needed for growth. Unlike oil or rare earth metals, sand doesn't grab headlines. But in the background, it's becoming a national security issue. When your economy and your sovereignty depends on how much coastline or city you can create, sand isn't just a resource, it's leverage. The extraction of sand might look benign, just trucks and dredgers scooping up sediment, but the consequences ripple through entire ecosystems. Riverbanks collapse, destroying agriculture and displacing villages. Dredged lakes invite saltwater intrusion, poisoning freshwater supplies. Coral reefs suffocate under sediment. Mangroves, which protect against floods, are ripped out for mining access. Biodiversity takes a major hit. Fish populations plummet, bird habitats vanish, and wetlands dry out. These aren't side effects. They're direct results of an extraction system with no safety net. And when the environment breaks down, it's not just animals that suffer. Humans do too, especially the poorest and most vulnerable. Much of the sand economy operates in legal gray zones. Companies skirt weak environmental laws, forge shipping documents, or funnel sand through third countries with looser controls. Exports get mislabeled as rock, granules, or even waste to bypass restrictions. In some cases, sand banned for export gets sold anyway, cleaned up through offshore intermediaries or shell corporations. It's a form of resource laundering, making dirty sand look clean on paper. With no global standards, the system relies on trust and paperwork, and both are easily manipulated. Behind the cement facades of modern cities lies a chain of transactions built on obfuscation, loopholes, and silence. So, why is sand so hard to control? For one, it's cheap and heavy, not worth much per ton, but expensive to move. That makes local sourcing attractive and regulation tricky. It's also incredibly fragmented. There's no global trading hub, no futures market, no unified pricing. Most countries treat it as a domestic issue, even when the impacts are international. And unlike oil or timber, there's no global watchdog monitoring sand extraction. It slips through borders in barges and trucks, often underreported or unrecorded. In short, sand is too big to ignore, yet somehow too small, too ordinary to govern. And that gap is exactly where the crisis grows. As the world wakes up to the sand crisis, innovators are searching for substitutes. Recycled construction waste is one promising path. Crushed concrete can replace up to half the sand needed in new buildings. Quarry dust, a byproduct of stone cutting, is another alternative gaining traction. Some researchers are even developing engineered sand, created from industrial byproducts like fly ash or copper slag. The technology exists, but cost and infrastructure remain hurdles. Alternatives often work in labs but struggle at scale. And while these options can ease demand, they're not silver bullets. We're not just looking for new materials. We're trying to rethink the foundation of how we build. A handful of cities are beginning to break the cycle of extract and build by embracing circular construction. In Amsterdam, old buildings are dismantled piece by piece and their materials reused in new developments. In Dubai, 3D printed structures made with recycled materials are starting to rise alongside traditional skyscrapers. Cities like Copenhagen are using software to track construction materials for future reuse. These shifts signal a deeper change, moving from endless growth to intelligent design. The future may not be about finding more sand, but needing less of it. Circular construction doesn't just save resources, it rewrites the blueprint of urban life in a resource-constrained world. We tend to think of sand as something that holds up buildings, but it also powers the digital world. The core of every microchip, the silicon wafer, is made from ultra-purified quartz sand. Solar panels, fiber optic cables, even lithium-ion batteries rely on it. As demand for renewable energy and electronics soars, so does the need for this specialized sand. And unlike construction sand, it requires extreme refinement, meaning supply chains are even narrower. We don't just live in concrete jungles, we live in silicon cities, and the same invisible resource that built our roads is now fueling artificial intelligence, climate tech, and the global digital economy. Most of the environmental destruction and illegal mining happens in the global south, in rivers and beaches across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. But the demand? That often comes from the west. From Silicon Valley data centers to luxury condos in Miami and London, the appetite for sand-intensive development is insatiable. Even if Western countries don't mine it themselves, their investments and consumption patterns drive the global trade. It's a familiar pattern. The global south extracts, the global north benefits. The sand crisis isn't just about resources, it's about systems of inequality, and how the costs of our modern world are so often buried somewhere else. So what happens if we run out of sand? Or at least the kind we need most? We're already seeing the cracks, rising prices, construction delays, and geopolitical friction over who controls the best reserves. In a world shaped by sand, scarcity isn't just about supply chains. It's about who gets to build, who gets left behind, and what's considered worth protecting. Will countries hoard it like oil? Will smuggling intensify? Will innovation race ahead or collapse under the weight of inertia? Sand was once a symbol of abundance. Now it's a warning, because the question isn't just whether we'll have enough to build the future, it's what kind of future we're even building. For years, sand flew under the radar. But recently, governments and institutions have started to pay attention. The United Nations released reports warning of unsustainable extraction. Some countries, like Indonesia and Vietnam, have imposed export bans or stricter oversight. But progress has been slow, patchy, and often unenforced. There's no global agreement on sand, no centralized system to monitor its flow. The problem isn't just lack of awareness, it's fragmentation. Each country treats it differently, if at all. And without international cooperation, bad actors find ways to slip through the cracks. Regulation is beginning, but it's still a whisper compared to the roar of demand. Sand may seem like an unlikely lens to view the world, but look closely, and it reflects something deeper. It shows how modern capitalism rewards extraction without accountability, how value is measured not by sustainability, but by short-term gain, how the most essential ingredients of our lives, housing, technology, cities, are built on materials we don't see, don't question, and don't protect. Sand is everywhere, and yet invisible, and that invisibility makes it vulnerable. In the story of sand, we see the story of global consumption itself, a system that builds endlessly while quietly erasing the ground beneath it. Most of us will never dredge a riverbed or approve a construction bid, but we are part of the system. We live in sand-built homes, scroll on sand-based screens, and benefit from sand-fueled economies. That gives us power to ask better questions, to support environmental journalism, to demand transparency from tech companies and developers. It starts with awareness, knowing that even the most ordinary resource has extraordinary consequences. Change doesn't come from guilt, it comes from curiosity, pressure, and refusing to look away. Because what we ignore today may define what's left tomorrow. To most of us, sand is just something between our toes. But to the future, it might be the rarest thing we never thought about. The real story of sand isn't about scarcity, it's about what we choose to value and what we're willing to destroy to build what's next. If this story made you think differently about the ground beneath your feet, consider subscribing for more untold stories that connect everyday life to the systems shaping our world. Leave a comment and let us know. Do you think the future of building should prioritize innovation or restraint? We'd love to hear how this story lands with you. And if you're curious about how invisible forces reshape entire communities, check out our last video on Walmart and how one store's success quietly hollowed out Main Street America.